Oh, wait a minute. Forgot to do something. The Noor and the Dinka, they're two tribes. They live in southern Sudan, Kenya. They live all over Central Africa. Both groups raise cattle. They're both cattle herders. They've lived close to each other for thousands of years, but their cultures are completely different. It's really kind of strange. They rarely intermarry. It's kind of like you guys and Apache. There are similarities. The language is almost the same, but your cultures are totally different. Anyway, that's the Noor and the Dinka. And as you can see, they use scarification, but they use scarification in different directions. So you can tell a Dinka or a Noor just by looking at his scars on his face. The Noor raise large herds of cattle and live off the milk. The Dinka butcher their herds. They have large herds as well, but they butcher their herds and they eat meat. So one group only drinks milk but doesn't eat hardly any meat. The other doesn't drink milk, but they do eat the meat, as weird as that is. The Noor also drink the blood from the cattle. They'll cut their artery in their neck and they'll drain some blood off and they'll mix it with the milk and then they'll drink the milk. Oh, come on. You eat locusts, don't give me that face.
Us Navajos actually cook the blood.
Well, so do the Germans. The Germans make sausage out of it, blood sausage. Yeah, sure, out of pork and...
Oh, milk? Damn.
Come on.
It's like eating pinto beans and eating ice cream afterwards.
Pink milk. The Dinka maintain tribal relationships with the families that they live near. The Noor maintain kinship based on the male line. So one is matrilineal, the other is patrilineal. As weird as that sounds, wait a minute, that's not so weird. You guys are matrilineal, aren't the Hopi patrilineal?
I don't know the difference.
Yeah, me too. What's matrilineal?
What is it? What's
Matrilineal means, in the case of the Navajo, if two people get married, then the man will move in with the woman's family. Or
That's
he'll,
Navajo.
yeah, that's Navajo, that's matrilineal. So things follow the female line, doesn't follow the male line.
Oh.
Okay. In southwestern tribes and in the buffalo hunting tribes of the northern plains, they're patrilineal. So
that's Hopi?
The Hopi are patrilineal as well. So, well, it's like Westerners. When my wife married me, she changed her name to my name. And all of our children would have my name, not her name. But that's patrilineal. And that's one of the reasons why Westerners had such a difficult time dealing with the native tribes. The southeastern tribes are all matrilineal. So there were women in charge of things. Well, they'd never seen women in charge of anything before, so they wanted to find the chief. And the chief, as far as they were concerned, was a male. And so they couldn't recognize a female as a head of a group. It was too strange. The Noor maintain kinship based on the male line. Of course, the Noor are larger, they're more militaristic. The Noor maintain costly and flexible dowry payments for their daughters, while the Dinka have small, flexible payments. So completely different. And of course, you never see a Dinka that wants to marry a Noor, or a Noor that wants to marry a Dinka. It just doesn't happen. They don't accept it, even though, as you can see, whoops, I'm sorry, went the wrong direction. As you can see, they look a lot alike, but they don't want to marry each other. Who would want to marry one of those guys? You know, it's one of those kind of deals. Even though they've got big herds of cattle, it really doesn't make any difference. They don't intermarry. As not strange as that is. Biological evolution occurs when certain genes become more common in a population than they were in the past. Biological evolution operates through natural selection. Natural selection is the evolutionary process that occurs under these conditions. Individual variability exists among members of the species on certain traits. The traits are associated with different reproductive rates. The traits have a hereditary basis, and that's one of the reasons why they exist, because they support the species. Fast-running antelope may have an advantage in outrunning their predators. The trade-off would be that their increased muscle mass would require increased food to maintain them. And this is one of the things you see anytime you're in a drought situation. You'll see these really fast antelope dying off. And they're the first ones to die off because they need to eat a lot of food in order to maintain their muscle mass. Slow-running antelope may be more susceptible to predators, but in a time of drought, when the food sources are limited, they're more likely to survive than the fast-running antelope because they have more body mass. And since they have more body mass, they have more fat and muscle mass to support their livelihood. If you're looking at a cheetah, you're looking at a fast-running antelope, then you're dealing with an individual that's relatively slender. And since they're so slender, they will be the first ones to die. That's the way it works. And that has to do with biological evolution. Cultural evolution is where the ideas are carried forward from one generation to another. That's what you're trying to do with your traditions. That's why Wilson wrote his book. He's trying to support the perpetuation of your traditional ideas. Theoretically, these ideas come from the pre-Columbian Navajo that lived in this area, theoretically. Possibly some of them have changed. Some of your traditions have changed. Anything that has to do with horses or sheep can't possibly be from before Europeans got here, because they're the ones that brought the sheep and the horses over here. So any traditions that deal with that are only 600 years old. I guess that's a long time. Well, 500 years old. 450 years old. But theoretically, all the rest of your traditions existed before that. Now, the question is, one of the questions that I am continually asking is, have your traditions changed to adapt to Western ideas? One example would be monogamy. How many wives did you guys have before Westerners got here? Westerners get really upset with people that have more than one wife for some reason. It's an odd question. What clothes did you wear? What parts of your body did you cover? This sense of sexuality or modesty, is this a Christian thing or is this traditional? Does this go back before the pre-Columbian? It's just a question that needs to be asked. And I've talked to Wilson about it, and he kind of coughs a little bit, and then he says, "Oh, this is what we've always had." And but you know, there's always a possibility that things change. You guys do adapt to a new environment. If you're dealing with a population that doesn't want to see men's penises, then potentially that, I mean, if that was something that happened before, this isn't going to happen after the Spanish got here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so culture does change, but it has to adapt. It's passed on from one person to the other, but if you have an individual whose family was traditional, but he became a Christian, he may change his traditions to fit the Christian ideals. That's the point. That's the idea.
Yeah, there actually is a lot of that happening in Navajo history to present, adaptation to westernized society.
Oh, sure, and we don't know where it is, because we don't, nothing was written down before. So all we have is word of mouth, and word of mouth is easy to change, because all you have to do is change one thing, or change two things, or change 10 things to make it fit. And it's still tradition. So, you know, traditions do change over time.
That's like one thing I thought about when I took that Navajo psychology, Navajo philosophy
Mhm.
course. I thought, you know, why does it have to be called that? You know, this implementation of from today philosophy put into this westernized subject,
Sure.
put together for it to be taught here like that.
Right.
It is what it is, but I thought about how that implementation of the philosophy, where that came from, and how it was before it decided to change into more of a psychological perspective.
Right.
And I thought, and I know for us, it's not called psychology.
Right, well,
Yeah.
that's a made-up term anyway.
Yeah, so, but then again, you know, it's like, and it made me think that way too, you know.
Right.
There was actually shifts that were made for that to happen.
Right.
Nowadays.
To think in that direction.
Yeah.
It's very much different between a collectivist and an individualistic society. European societies are all individualistic. Chinese society, for example, is very collectivistic. Most of the indigenous populations have collectivistic societies, otherwise they wouldn't have been able to survive. So, yeah, the trying to mesh the two sometimes doesn't always fit together very well. There may have been very little psychology, a lot of philosophy, but not very much psychology. So now we try to create this. So this may be a brand new idea that doesn't fit in any traditions. So you can talk about it traditionally, but does it really fit, is the question. And if it doesn't help, of course, people aren't going to do it. Cultural evolution follows natural selection. Some ideas are more selectable in a culture than others. These ideas tend to be political structures. Well, how do you guys boss each other around? How do you control a society? How was the society controlled? Since your lifestyle was a little bit more sedentary, if you go to the northern plains where they were fairly nomadic, there was usually somebody in charge, and that somebody decided when they were going to move. He was the chief. He told his underlings, and his underlings were the other elders, where they were going to go, and they would either agree with him or disagree with him. I mean, it was a political structure run by one guy. But it was kind of an interesting situation, because if they didn't agree with what he was going to do, they could veto it, and then they wouldn't do it. Or they would appoint a new head man because he was making bad decisions. So there are always political structures. Potentially there are political structures. If you look at the indigenous peoples of the woodlands, like the Shawnee had villages, and each village was in charge of a different thing. So you had a political village, you had a warring village, you had a movement village. There were like 4 different groups. And each village ran one thing or the other. So if the British came in and wanted to talk to the people that were in charge of where they were, then they would have to talk to this village. But if they wanted to talk to the head man was in the political village. But if they wanted to talk to the war chief, he was in a totally different village. Well, they weren't used to that kind of a structure. So they really made a mess of dealing with the Shawnee. Political structure. So everything has a political structure. If you go to England, they have a different political structure than the French have. They have a different political structure than the lowlands, Belgium and the Netherlands. They had a different political structure. Russia had a different political structure. Everybody has some kind of political structure. The other thing is, almost everybody has a religion. Now, why in the world would everybody have a religion? And why isn't their deity, why aren't their deities called the same thing? Why would everybody have a religion? What purpose does religion serve?
To be sane.
To be sane?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're insane if we have no religion.
Well, basically, it seems like it's just a structure for psychological stability.
Okay,
For a person not to go crazy, do crazy things.
why would that happen through a religion? Why does religion control that?
Because they think that it's spiritual.
Right, it explains the unexplainable.
It's the spirituality that we look up to. There's no religion as there's no word for it.
Okay,
So the spirituality that see on our like Hajong is what we go by as a Dene,
but doesn't Dene mean,
Navajo.
yeah, but it means children of the holy people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we're
So
not-
we know there's a spiritual structure because, holy means that somebody above you, okay, okay. So there is a spirituality.
That's for the Navajos that believe in that. There's other Navajos that believe in Catholic, Christian,
Right,
NAC.
right, but we're talking about pre-Columbian.
Oh, pre-Columbian.
Yeah, we're talking about pre-Columbian. Right now, yeah, there's a lot of Mormons on the Navajo
Yeah.
Reservation. So religions are everywhere. You've got them just about in all countries. Some form of spirituality. So religions are a cultural, evolve from one culture to the next or from one group to the next, and political structures evolve from one group to the next.
For your second question,
Yeah.
why there's so many different types, I think that overall, could possibly be a growth of a person developing, I would say merging into a different direction, saying, I already know about this, I know how to
Right.
script this, but there's like something inside their mind that says, I could take that and go over here and do this, to add this to it. And it seemed like it just went off from there on. It's just like evolution.
Exactly.
How everything's blew up in the world from the time that it was just so quiet once.
But think of it this way, the more individualistic the society, the more religions that society has.
Yeah.
So it's different ways of thinking. In a collective society, everybody tries to think the same way. Or they want them to think the same way. They are conditioned to think the same way. But in an individualistic society, you've got a lot of different individuals. In order for once upon a time there was only one Christian church, and then and of course they tried to break away from time to time, and then in 1517, the Lutheran church began. But it didn't begin in Rome. It's not like it, in the seat of the religion. No, it's about the farthest point you can possibly get to Rome. It was in Germany, in the areas of Germany. So Rome had no contact. They didn't have power over this group of individuals because they were too far away. So individualistic thinking started, or was able to flower in that environment. It had already done it before, in the same area, with different groups in Germany. Germany is where Protestantism began, and Lutheranism wasn't the first splinter group coming out of Germany. They were mounting crusades to try to stop all of this different religious thinking in Germany, time after time after time. Eventually, they lost their power, and they couldn't control those guys anymore. And then they created their own different religion from Catholicism. Hello. got bathing suits. Yeah, I would have bathing suits. I looked at a video of men's bathing suits, but it was a video, so I can't show videos. Anyway, okay, so copying errors are very common with cultural ideas, just like with religions. The Taiping uprising that I talked about before. It was a Christian uprising, but it was only a Christian uprising dealing with 15 pages of the Bible, just those 15 pages. The copying, so it was a copying error. And of course he thought from reading that he was the Son of God. He was sure that he was Jesus' brother. He was his Chinese brother. And you can read books about Jesus' Chinese brother, as curious as that is. So sometimes there's copying errors. People make mistakes. They say it one way and then the person hears it a totally different way. So there are mistakes that are made. And this is one of the reasons why in religion there is so much ritualization, so that you say the same thing over and over and over again. But we still have different ways of reading things, of interpreting things. For the longest time, the Catholic Church, until the 1960s, all of their liturgy was in Latin. Well, nobody speaks Latin except priests. The Romans that spoke Latin died out, 1,000 years ago. So nobody spoke Latin, yet all of their rituals were in Latin. And most of the people that were listening to their rituals didn't understand what they were saying. They were told what they were supposed to think, because it was in a different language. Copying errors. Copying errors or mutations are rare among genes, but they're very common in cultural ideas. Okay. Let me think of an example. All I can think of is naked people. Let me use naked people as an example. In the United States, we don't hardly ever do we go swimming without any clothes on, right? It hardly ever happens. But in Germany on Thursday night, it's nude swimming at the Schwimmbad. These are Germans. There are more people immigrated from Germany to the United States than any other country. So most of the people in the United States, many people in the United States, have German ancestry. I have German ancestry. Lots of Germans in the United States. So did that copy? Do we swim naked in the United States? Whether we're German or whether we're English or anything? Or even if we're German, do we still swim naked on Thursday nights? No, of course we don't, because that's not part of this culture, but it's part of that culture. And when it happens on a Thursday night, you go into the Schwimmbad, you don't think anything about it because it's nude swimming on Thursday night. Okay, so it's a lot of copying errors in cultures. If you watch advertisements in Japan, there's a lot of nudity in Japanese advertisements. That's acceptable in their society. Do we ever see nude advertising in the United States? Never, ever. Okay. A lot of copying errors, but of course genes is a totally different story. This is what bathing suits looked like in 1927, what it looked like in 1925. 25 years before, they were wearing bloomers, as you can see. Of course, they had to have something on their heads, and of course, in 1875, they were more dressed than most people are today, that just to go swimming. I can imagine you couldn't swim in that. It would pull you down. Anyway, there you go, the difference of swimsuits. Copying errors. Genes pass very slowly. Genes pass vertically from parent to offspring. Culture passes horizontally from one person to another, to anyone that they come in contact with. Cultural evolution can be very, very rapid. A good example would be the music that we listen to. Did we have to wait for a whole generation before we changed the type of music that we listen to? Rap music, rock and roll, hip hop. Wait a minute, what was before rock and roll? Big band, the big band sound. All of these things were mutations of a different type of music. The blues, the jazz, hard rock, acid rock, techno music. All of these things evolve from one idea to the other. And that's cultural evolution. It's very, very rapid. So things will change. While genes have to be adaptive to be repeated, cultural ideas do not have to be adaptive. And sometimes cultural ideas are bad ideas, but they are repeated anyway because it's cultural evolution. So sometimes people do things that hurt them, such as smoking tobacco, or smoking pot, or drinking alcohol. All of these things are repeated. They're all cultural. They change over time, but they're destructive. If we look at the United States in the 1950s and 1960s, almost half the people in the United States smoked cigarettes. Life expectancy when I was born in 1949 was 56. 56. And the reason is because of tobacco and alcohol. We had a lot of people coming back from World War II. A lot of those guys smoked. They continued smoking and they died relatively young. The ones that survived World War II survived to this day were mostly people who didn't drink and didn't smoke. But the ones that smoked and drank like they were supposed to, like their culture told them they were supposed to, died young, died in their 40s and 50s and 60s, and maybe even their 70s, if they were lucky. They made it to their 70s. Even maladaptive ideas can spread, as with the headhunters of New Guinea, when half of them died due to a degenerative disease passed from their diseased victims. In other words, they were headhunters. They would eat the brains of their enemies, and they acquired degenerative diseases from their victims. And half of the population died, as weird as that is. What happens next? Dynamic social impact theory posits that individuals come to influence each other, and they do so primarily in terms of how often the individuals interact, which ultimately leads to clusters of like-minded people who are separated by geography, and of course these are cultures. They create their own cultures. So if you look at college campuses, where there's a lot of partying taking place, for the longest time, Colorado State was the party school in the United States. I know, Colorado State. The Golden Rams, aren't they the Rams? I think they're the Rams. Colorado State. Hey, Bernie. Anyway, but this is very common on college campuses. Sometimes they have to close fraternities because their initiation rites are destructive. At my own college, I went to Wabash College, one of the fraternities they closed the doors of the fraternities when the initiation for that fraternity killed a kid because he had alcohol poisoning. They made him chug-a-lug tequila, which is not the best tasting thing in the world, but he had to drink a whole fifth of tequila. Well, you can do that if you want to, but if you're not accustomed to it, then the alcohol will get into your system and will shut everything down. And that's what happened with him. He died of alcohol poisoning. I've had these kids come into the emergency room. It's sad because there's not a whole lot you can do about it. With a lot of things, you can give them IVs and you can give them a medication that will counteract whatever the psychoactive substance is. But with alcohol, once it gets into your gut, there's nothing you can do. You can't slow it down, you can't stop it, you can't block it. There's just nothing you can do. Now the sad thing is, when they come in, they're not dead yet. But yeah, I know, you have to watch them expire. It's really kind of tragic. Norms develop among those who communicate with each other on a regular basis. I'm trying to think of an example other than alcohol. Let's think of a more pleasant example. Tattoos or scarification. One group does it, so So another group in another institution will get the same tattoos in the same places. They have secret handshakes, as much fun as that is. And of course, if you shake hands with somebody in that way, then they're supposed to do something positive for you. As weird as that is. Anyway, fun stuff. 2007, Callum and Harton followed a group of students for a year. The researchers set a baseline by discovering the students' attitudes before they became students. So no matter whether they were conservative or liberal or Democrats or Republicans or liked K-pop or whatever, these individuals, once they got into college, it was really kind of interesting. If they got into a select dorm with select individuals, they discovered that the students who ate at the same, lived in the same dorms and ate at the same dining halls, no matter what their attitudes were before they came to school, it changed. It amalgamated. So they started all having the same ideas. These they refer to as microcultures in the different living units. They developed a culture unto themselves, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. Now, we don't have the same type of situation here at Dinka College. I don't think we do. You've got all of those dormitories over there, but are they microcultures like they are here? Do you have one of the dormitories, everybody's gamers, and another dormitory, people go out and drink on the weekends? I don't know. I don't know if that works here. When I was in college, of course, I've told you this story before. This was in 1967 when I started college. It was during the Civil Rights Movement. All the fraternities were segregated, so all the black students had to live in the dorms. Well, I lived in the dorms too, so a lot of the people that I interacted with were African American. There were also white people there, of course, but I interacted with a lot of African Americans. And actually, there weren't that many African Americans, but because this was the cultural upheaval that was taking place at the time, I became very sensitive to their wants and needs because I was intimately involved with some of the things that took place. So in 1968, one of the things that I did in the summer of 1968, I went with a friend of mine to Chicago. And in Chicago that year was Martin Luther King Jr. had a march in Chicago. And I actually met Martin Luther King Jr. I probably wouldn't have met him if I had been in a fraternity. I wouldn't have gone to Chicago unless I had friends who were, and actually I needed to have the right friends because this guy was active in the civil rights movement. And because of that, I was able to meet Martin Luther King Jr., which was really kind of interesting. I shook hands with him and he immediately looked away as if, oh, this is a white guy, I'm not sure I want to see him. I may not be the most attractive man in the world, unfortunately. Contemporary legends are simply fictional stories that are told in modern societies as if they are true. Booby-trapped Halloween candy is one such contemporary legend. This doesn't happen hardly ever, booby-trapped candy. But they warn you every Halloween, they always warn you to check your children's candy. There have only been 80 documented cases since 1959. 1959 was 60 years ago. So it averages just a little better than one a year. As weird as that is. But it's still a legend, and we still talk about this as if our kids are going to bite into a Hershey bar and get a needle in their lip or something. It just doesn't happen. Another contemporary legend is that there are alligators living in the New York sewer system. If you go down the New York sewer system, for one thing, it smells really, really bad. Okay. But for another thing, it's way, way too cold in New York for alligators to live. There's a reason why they live in Florida and not in Canada, because it's way, way too cold in Canada for alligators to survive. Not only that, but it's pretty toxic down there. In order for somebody to go into the sewer system, they have to put on a hazmat suit. You can't just walk down in there and not become contaminated with anything you can possibly imagine. HIV-infected needles are being left in coin return slots to contaminate an unsuspecting person. I'm not sure who these people are that are supposed to be putting contaminated needles in the coins return slots, but there's never actually been a recorded case of an individual, of anybody contracting HIV from being struck with a needle in a coin return slot. It just doesn't happen. Sorry. But it's a good story. These contemporary legends are, they follow us all over the place. I'm trying to, and I try to think of them, but I'm just not hip enough to figure out what they are. Maybe if I were on Facebook, I would find some of these things. Facebook comes up with them all the time. Everybody's supposed to be afraid of, I don't know, snakes or whatever.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, sayings and stuff that will make people just avoid certain things.
Scared. Why are they trying to make people scared? Why would you lie to somebody just to scare them?
And nowadays, it's just mostly about toxic stuff, relationships and sadness.
Oh, well, you can't argue with that. I think I married most of the toxic people, at least once.
Too many of that. For me, a lot of this stuff, I remember hearing stuff like this from back in the day.
Sure.
And
And people repeat the story and you assume that it's true.
yeah.
It
And
turns out not to be.
yeah. I think I always looked at it more as like a survey of people to actually see if that type of communication.
But how do you react to that? I mean, theoretically, you're supposed to be scared and you're supposed to stay away from, Halloween candy or whatever.
Yeah.
That was a good excuse for me to eat all my kids' Halloween candy. So I got all the chocolate bars. Wait a minute, this might have a needle in it. Let me eat it.
After that, I just stopped retreating.
Researchers have found that rumors and legends are more likely to spread when they can evoke shared emotional reactions among people. That's one of the, and this is a kind of a problem. We have a president that, these are conspiracy theories, and we have a president that supports some of these conspiracy theories. A lot of the conspiracy theories have to do with immigrants. He does not like immigrants. He was, and he uses his verbiage to get people emotionally aroused, dealing with select groups of individuals. The people down in South Central and America and Mexico. He was saying that there are these huge masses of people trying to cross the border. Well, the reality is that no more people are trying to cross the border than have ever tried to cross the border on the southern border. So he gets people all aroused as to what we're supposed to do with these guys, or that they were attacking us, or that they're bringing drugs across the border, or that they are rapists. I don't know if you remember I watch a lot of political stuff, so I can remember when he said that they were rapists coming across the border, the Mexicans. He said some of them might be okay, but there are rapists and murderers coming across the border. Do they send us their best people? No, they send us their worst people. Well, that has actually happened. For a long time, Cubans weren't allowed to leave Cuba and come to the United States. But then they sent some people over in a flotilla, and a lot of those people were the individual. They had emptied out their asylums, and they sent us all of their mentally ill people from Canada or from Cuba. Anyway, so if we can evoke emotion, a lot of times that's where our legends come from. The characters from fiction that are the most memorable are the ones that evoke the emotion in us, and that is one of the reasons why that is what is used. A good example would be the news. The news doesn't tell you all the happy stuff that happened today. It tells you all the bad stuff that happened today. If they only told you happy stuff, you wouldn't watch. Why would you need to watch? Happy stuff happened today. Oh, okay, well, I don't have to watch the news then. But if, Kobe Bryant died in a helicopter crash over the weekend, that's one of the things that we need to talk about. The president's being impeached by the impeachment trial is going on in the Senate. That's negative news. That's something that we all need to listen to. There was a tsunami. There was a 7.7 earthquake in the Caribbean, and there may be a tsunami headed toward Puerto Rico. That's something that we need to listen to. Earthquakes, floods, all these negative things. Shootings in Aztec, I don't know where we're having shootings. Anyway, these are things that we want to listen to, we want to hear. We don't want to hear the positive stuff, we want to hear the negative stuff. Creation stories, the Fulani of Africa believe that the world was created from a drop of milk, as cool as that is, drop of milk. The Japanese mythology states that the world was created from brine, which is salt water dripping from the tip of the jeweled spear of heaven. And here you can see this guy's got the jeweled spear and he's creating the earth. Is that the only creation story we're going to talk about? No, let's talk about the Judeo-Christian belief that God, whoever God happens to be, there's only one, so we don't need to identify that select individual, created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. Then he rested on the seventh day, which is why we always get Sunday off, because we live in a Judeo-Christian society. Otherwise, what would you do on Sundays? Watch the Super Bowl. Isn't it this Sunday?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Super Bowl Sunday, right? But what if we had to work on Sunday? That would be terrible. We wouldn't be able to see the Super Bowl. The kinds of stories that are especially likely to persist in our memories are ones that contain a few minimally counterintuitive ideas. Minimally counterintuitive means that they're statements that are surprising and unusual in the sense that they violate our expectations but are not too outlandish. If it's too outlandish, we're not going to believe it. We don't want to hear it. If it's too crazy, we don't want to hear this stuff. But if it could possibly be true, then that's the type of story that we want to listen to. I was watching the news last night, and they were talking about making a boat out of glass. Now, who's stupid enough to make a boat out of glass? Well, this guy he did it. He made a boat out of glass, and he sealed it with this Flex Sealer, clear. Flex Seal Clear is what he used. Are you as excited as I was? I can make a glass boat. Well, this guy made a boat that looks like a guitar. As cool as that is, that may be outlandish. We may remember this because it looks like a guitar, but the reality is it's not practical, but it is possible. It's minimally counterintuitive. You should try to find a picture of minimally counterintuitive. That was not easy. It took me a while to find this picture. You're welcome.
But then, yeah, I think what you're talking about with that Flex Seal,
Yeah.
that's something. So describe that.
Yeah, I guess you could do it. And how much Flex Seal did he have to do?
Yeah.
To use? He used really thick pieces of glass too. I don't know.
Yeah.
I saw it on television. I was excited.
From my understanding, that stuff doesn't work.
If you can make a boat out of it, it's worth something. At least we can make a glass boat if we need to. Does globalization mean that we are destined to all become citizens of a homogeneous world culture? And this is something that people are afraid of. This is one of the... There's a bifurcation in the United States right now. People that want things to go back the way that they were, and people that want to keep moving in a positive direction. They want to. We have progressives and we have conservatives. We have people that want to take things back to the way they were. We have people in the United States that want the United States to be a white society. things are changing in the United States. Once upon a time, white people dominated everything. All of the actors were white, all of the presidents were white, all the Congress was white, all the Supreme Court justices were white. And it looked like not just white people, but white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, especially Protestants. This is one of the reasons why when they decided that they were going to Christianize all the Indian tribes, which was one of the deals that they made to keep from trying to do away with all the Indians in North America, like the Canadians were doing, like the Australians were doing. In order for them not to do that, one of the deals that they made was that they would Christianize. It gave them fertile ground to Christianize all of the indigenous peoples of North America. So that was the deal. So why didn't they give any of the reservations to the Catholic Church?
When I was a little girl, like in boarding school, I didn't know what was going on, but we were told to choose Catholic or Protestants.
Right.
And so all I know is that when there's like I just hear it among my parents that they bury one of our relatives at the Catholic Church, meaning that they call Catholic Church with long skirts.
Right.
Yeah. So that's
The
how
black
I know.
robes.
That's how I know, and
Right.
I was a little girl.
Right.
I
But you're not
observed
that
how they
old,
were-
Doris.
But I observed how they were dressed, so I knew that they were called Catholics.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just chose Catholic. And
Just another group.
yeah, and then the one that chose Protestants, they're Christians to this day.
Yeah. So what they did, they took all the reservations and they gave it to a different Protestant religion. So Presbyterians got this one, Quakers got this one, Methodists got another one, the Baptists got another reservation. That's what happened initially. But then what they discovered was the Protestants didn't want to stick around very long. They built their missions and then they figured, well, somebody else will come after me. But nobody wanted to. So who in the world were they going to give the reservations to Christianize all the natives? Well, it didn't work with Protestants because Protestants didn't want to stick around that long. But the Catholics, they could assign somebody to a reservation and they could live there, and they would live there for the rest of their lives. But see, they didn't like Catholics. The reason they didn't like Catholics is because the people from southern Europe and the people from eastern Europe were all Catholic. And they didn't like those individuals because, well, for one thing, they had black hair. Nothing worse than black hair, as far as they were concerned. So if you look at the initial, the United States in the 19th century, it was primarily Protestant. It was white and it was Protestant. And then at the end of the 19th century, they realized, wait a minute, if we're going to maintain this, we need to allow the Catholic churches in there. And then the Catholic churches took over different reservations. Now the interesting thing was, of course, they were trying to control everybody. They were using the churches as a means of social control on the reservations. So at that time, they really were controlling the people up north, the people in North Dakota, the people in Montana, Washington State, and Idaho. So they gave all those reservations to the Catholic Church.
So like 4 or 5 years later, I saw the Mormons coming around.
Right. Now the Mormons are really kind of interesting because when did the Mormon Church start? See, you can trace Catholicism back 2,000 years because it's the beginning of the church. You can trace Protestantism back 500 years because it's started in 1517 with Luther. So it's 500 years old. But how old is the Lutheran Church? I mean, the Mormon Church? It started in the 1830s in Elvira, New York, in the 1830s. So it's only a couple hundred years old, as weird as that is. Look how powerful they are in this area. Now, there are Mormons everywhere, but there are a lot more Mormons here than there are anyplace else.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Wow.
Well, do you know the history of the Mormons?
No.
See, they started in the
And
1830s.
they have the nicest churches too.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Plain and everything.
That's because, well, people give them a lot of money. I mean, members of the church give them a lot of money. I'm not trying to denigrate the Mormons. That's not what I'm trying to do. But let me explain to you what their history is. They started off in New York, and then they decided that they would create colonies in the new areas. So they moved to Illinois, Nauvoo. They moved to Nauvoo and they built this wonderful city, and it had wonderful churches and it had all this wonderful stuff. And the people around them didn't like it, so they kicked them out. They drove them away. They mounted an army to make them leave, and so they did. They left. They went through Iowa into Nebraska, and they stopped in Omaha. And then they didn't have any place to go. So Brigham Young decided that he would take a group out to Salt Lake City. He was looking for a place to go. Salt Lake City is a green valley. And if you look at Utah, most of it's not really that green, but then you've got Salt Lake City, and it is. So, and Utah, of course, there weren't anybody there, there weren't any settlers there except for natives, and most of those natives were Utes and Paiutes and whatnot. Okay, so then he went out there, and so in Illinois and Nebraska, they left small colonies, small groups, but they didn't really flourish because nobody trusted them. One of the reasons is because they had plural marriage. This is on tape, isn't it? Oh God, I'm gonna get in trouble.
No, that's why, man. I find it interesting.
Anyway, so they flourished. They flourished in Utah. So this is the seat of Mormonism, is Salt Lake City, of course. That's where their main temple is. And so Washington State has a relatively large number. Idaho has a relatively large number. Utah, of course, Nevada, and northern Arizona. But that's it. They've also colonized into Hawaii. So Hawaii has a large Mormon population. But other than that, they've got individual churches all over the place, but nothing like this area. They control the politics of Utah pretty much. I know. I mean, Mitt Romney's Mormon, and he was the governor of Massachusetts, but they don't have large colonies in Massachusetts. So, anyway.
That's very interesting.
It is kind of fascinating, isn't it? Yeah.
Where did they get booted out?
Where did they get kicked?
After New York, where did they get booted out?
Nauvoo, Illinois. Nauvoo. They called it Nauvoo. Navoo, I think.
Nebraska.
Yeah, they went through Iowa and then they stopped in Omaha. And they have what they call the Mormon Bridge and the Mormon Trail in Iowa. Of course, they've got all these other religious groups that were there, and they're going, don't stop here, dude. Just keep on trucking. So they kind of kept them moving west until they finally found a place where they could stop. And that was Salt Lake City. That's the actual history. I don't know what, I've talked to Mormons, but they're kind of sketchy about their history.
Yeah.
I'm sure theirs is a lot more positive than what I've said. Well, so the question was, so here they've got this chunk of, this really nice chunk of land in Utah. And just before the Civil War, they petitioned the federal government to allow them to create a state. And they wanted to call it Deseret. So if you see anything that's Deseret, what they're talking about is this mega state that they tried to create. It was going to be all of Utah, most of Nevada, all of northern Arizona, parts of Colorado, and parts of Idaho. So it was this like this huge chunk of land, and they were trying to create their own state, but they didn't let them do it. In order for them to become a state, in order for Utah to become a state, they were loyal to the Union. In order for them to become a state, they had to give up plural marriage. So before they passed that, and there's a federal law that says you can only marry one woman at a time. Otherwise, it's bigamy, if you remember the laws, as fun as that is. Okay. All right. I'm not trying to be negative about the religion. It's just that, all religions have a history, and sometimes it's not very pretty, some of the things that happen.
Yeah, that's actually one thing I've learned from one of the Navajo instructors. Talks about the history of Catholics. And
It's ugly.
yeah,
It's not a pretty.
pretty crazy, and got me wondering, about the history of all these other religious groups and churches and stuff.
Right.
Like, 'cause they're just there. I read them. This is the building. This is who they are. I'm just sitting there like thinking, I wonder what they're about, or what their history is. But yet with you, you're like talking about this. I don't find no offense at all. I find it fascinating.
Yeah, but
everything like that. But
who in television land will
But
agree?
in reality, it's actually like, it's just how you mentioned earlier about these different groups of Native Americans, of different bands.
Right.
And everything like that. Everybody's just growing, it seems, I bet 5 or 10 years from now, there's gonna be a new group of religion and something new coming out.
You never know what's going to happen next. It's so exciting. Yeah, the Catholics have a pretty ugly history. But then again, most of the religions do. Because most religions are exclusionary. We started this religion because this is the one way to get to heaven. That means that I know the answer and none of you guys do. Because I know the direction. I know the way to get to heaven. And that's how they all started. I mean, there's only... If you believe in Christianity, does that mean that you think that Muslims go to heaven, or Hindus go to heaven, or Buddhists go to heaven, or whatever? That's the problem. So Baptists, they know how to get to heaven, but does that mean the Methodists don't get to go? Or Presbyterians, or Episcopalians? Well, yeah, that's exactly what that means. One of the reasons that Seventh-day Adventists, Seventh-day Adventists? Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that they're the only ones that are going to go to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're like the very few number, and that the number that says in the Bible.
That's right, there's
that
a
number.
specific number, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
and they
kinda
believe
amazing.
that they're the ones that are there.
There you go. You have a card. You show it at the gate, and you get to go, and everybody else gets tossed down into hell. And here's hell right there. There we go. Who goes to hell? They do. Everybody but us. So is this what's going to happen? Are we all going to become Facebook freaks or something? And all Facebook people are going to have the same ideas and the same... Is that what's going to happen? Is globalization going to happen? Are we going to have just one culture in the world, and it's going to be headed by that strange boy band group from Korea?
That there, what you're talking about, Facebook and putting it with religion, it made me wonder, about 2 years ago to last year also too, I've seen people say prayers through Facebook posts. I've seen them posting up stuff like religious stuff, God, this and that, Jesus, this and that. And then it got to the point to where it's like you're scrolling through and you read something about Jesus. If you shared and something good will happen to you, but if you ignore, then...
That's like a chain letter.
Yeah, exactly. It's like something bad will happen to you. And I'm just sitting there thinking like, wow, is that what religion's really about on Facebook? Is that how bad it's getting?
Well, that's what religion's like anyway. I mean, if you're a Baptist, then that's the way to go to heaven. And everybody else doesn't. Just like the Jehovah's Witnesses, there's a certain number of people that get to go. So yeah, I mean, that's, it's just a religious idea. It's an exclusionary idea. And that's the problem I see with religion, is that they exclude other individuals. If you don't adhere to my way of thinking, then you're going to go to hell. And that's the part that I'm opposed to. So the question is, are we all going to be the same culture? Because we all listen to the same music and we all speak the same language, and we can get a translation of what the Koreans are saying, those strange kids. They speak English really well. I saw them on the Grammys the other night. The boy band, BTK, what is it?
BTS.
BTS?
Yeah.
What does it stand for?
I don't know.
Okay, probably something in Korean. Probably not. The trend toward globalization is simultaneously paralleled by an opposing trend toward increasing tribalism. When we talk about tribalism, we're not really talking about Indian tribes. What we're talking about is different ideas. The tribalism in the United States right now seems to be liberal and conservative. So liberals don't like conservatives, conservatives don't like liberals. If you're a liberal, you watch MSNBC, CBS, CNN. You watch a certain news. If you're conservative, you read Breitbart and you watch Fox News. If you're a conservative, and it creates this really interesting bifurcation in the United States, where these individuals believe everything they hear on Fox, and these individuals are constantly arguing about those things. One of the reasons that the president's being impeached is because the president supported a conspiracy theory when he was dealing with the Ukraine. And of course, this has to do with the Russians. So anytime it has to do with the Russians, those were my enemies. Those were the guys that I was fighting against when I was in the service. It really upsets me that we have a president that supports the Russians, that seems to give the Russians a pass on just about everything. But that's one of the reasons that he's being impeached, because he said it wasn't the Russians that hacked into the DNC server, the Democratic server, during the last election. It was the Ukrainians. That's what he said. And that's one of the things that he was trying to get Zelensky to do, was to look into this conspiracy theory that has been debunked by just about everybody, except the people who listen to Breitbart and the people that watch Fox News. So we have this really strange tribalism taking place in the United States. Not just the United States, it's all over. If you go to France, you've got a conservative group and you've got the more liberal people. In England, it's the same way. So if the conservatives take over all the governments in Europe, and they've already got the government in Russia, and they take over the governments in the Middle East, then all of these really strange conspiracy theories, all these ideas that other people are bad and we are good, so that strange bifurcation of us and them, then potentially what will happen is everything will change. Once upon a time, there was a political movement in the world called fascism. It started in Italy, but then it was adopted by Hitler, and then it was adopted by what's his name in Spain. Anyway, then Hitler started a war, and by golly, he just about took over the whole world. So we have this conservative movement taking place, where because they're conservative, they say some people are good and some people are bad. The liberals say nobody is bad. Everybody has a degree of goodness and badness. How am I doing on time?
10 minutes.
2:50, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, okay. No, come on in, because I'm talking about good and bad. Okay. And you walk in the room. What does that mean? So we had this fascist movement taking place, and they almost took over the world. The same thing was going on in Japan. Good people, bad people. The Japanese don't like select individuals. The Japanese don't like anybody but Japanese. It's really kind of weird. They hate Koreans, as weird as that is. Even though they're right there, they hate them guys. They are second, third-class citizens in Japan. So we had this really conservative movement taking place, and that was part of what we were fighting against during World War II. The Germans decided that the worst people in the world were the Jews, were Jewish people. But people have been saying that the Jews are bad people for 1,000 years. And there's a reason for it. It has to do with the Bible. I'll tell you about it in a minute. I know. Now, the reality is that ethnically there are some cities that are microcosms of the world. Cities like New York. If you go to New York, you can find Dominicans, you can find Puerto Ricans, you can find Greeks, you can find all kinds of people. If you go to Saley, you can find Navajos and me. I guess that's about it. Okay. If you go to Gallup, you got all kinds of tribes and you got white people, but do you have Greeks? Do they have an Ethiopian restaurant, and they have a Chinese restaurant, and I think it's run by Koreans if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, so there's Koreans there. If you go to Albuquerque, it's pretty much the same thing. But if you go to New York City, you can go to different enclaves of people. It's the same way in Singapore, it's the same way in Toronto, it's the same way in Sydney. They're kind of like global cities. London is that way. London has started putting black people in their television shows, as weird as that is. There's no place that's whiter than England. England is the whitest place in the world, except they're changing now. All of a sudden they're changing, and we're starting to see black people in their television shows, as if they've been there all along. They're showing they're showing a television show about the 1820s, and here's all these black people walking around. You're going, wait a minute, that's not right. That's not what happened. Each has many distinct ethnic enclaves. We're talking about New York, Singapore, Toronto, and probably London. Thus, there are trends toward cultural heterogeneity globally, while there is a trend toward cultural homogeneity at local levels. So if we go to Topeka, Kansas, how many white people are there in Topeka, Kansas? Lots. How about Kansas City? Same thing. How about St. Louis? Same thing. Chicago, that's more of an international city. Lots of different people in Chicago. But if you go to Omaha, well, yeah, there's the same thing in Omaha. But if you go to I don't know, Phoenix, who's in Phoenix? Do they have a Puerto Rican enclave in Phoenix? No, I didn't think so.
Mixed up.
Yeah. Is there a Chinatown in Phoenix? No. There's not a Chinatown in Albuquerque either. So at the local level, it's more homogeneous. You got natives in Phoenix, you have natives, you have white people. That's about it.
There's Chinatown in Hawaii.
Sure. Why is there a Chinatown in Hawaii? The Hawaiian Islands were started as kind of a farm for pineapple. Dole was there. And so he kept bringing in these different groups to work the fields. And he brought in Portuguese, he brought in Japanese, he brought in Chinese, he brought in Puerto Ricans. Yeah. So he's the one that made Japan, or Dole was the one. He kind of owned the islands because they were farming all those. And of course there are there was a problem with the Hawaiians. The Hawaiians didn't really reproduce very well. So, so if you had a woman, she may have 2 or 3 kids, Hawaiian kids. And then if you had the Chinese, they had 10 kids, or the Japanese would have 10 kids, and the Portuguese would have 10 kids. So the problem was that the Hawaiians weren't reproducing very well. And this is a problem that they were having before anybody came to the islands, because there wasn't a lot of, it's an island, there's a limited amount of space. but when they brought in other people, so there's not very many ethnic Hawaiians left.
There's a history about a royal family too,
Right,
yeah.
right.
So the royal family were marriage with their own cousins.
Right,
On their dad's side and their mom's side.
brothers and sisters
Yeah.
marrying each other, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, come on.
Oh,
Did you have a sister? I can't imagine marrying my sister either. My sister is probably my least favorite person in the whole world. I would never marry her. Cultures that are individualistic include a variety of practices and customs that encourage individuals to place their own personal goals ahead of those of the collective and to consider how they are distinct from others. And this has to do with individualistic cultures. Individualistic cultures track children at school, and of course this is something we do in the United States. Workers are meritocracies. That's how they pay their workers, whether they do well, not just how long they've been there. College-age children are being encouraged to move out of their parents' homes. They kick the kids out at 18. That's what happened to me, except I was 17 when I got kicked out of my house to go to college. Employees being given individual cubicles, as ugly and horrible as that is, you can hear everything in a cubicle. It's just horrible. People choosing to put their elderly relatives in retirement homes. This is something that individualistic cultures do. Collectivistic cultures include many cultural practices, institutions, and customs that encourage individuals to place more emphasis on collective goals, the goals of the in-groups, the goals of the groups, and that's a collectivist society. Children sleep with their parents in collectivist societies. Classes of school children being promoted together to the next grade regardless of the performance of some individual children. Marriages being arranged by parents, not by love or whatever. How do you choose a mate? Luck? Draw?
I don't know about my first marriage, it was like a old-fashioned traditional marriage.
Oh, is that right? You had an arranged marriage?
Mhm.
Oh.
I didn't know that person, I didn't know his background.
How'd it work out? Yeah, well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Don't feel bad. My first
Actually,
marriage,
no.
I selected.
Actually, it was a medicine man, was my father-in-law.
Oh, was that right?
So there were, my parents used to help them.
Oh, jeez.
And from the beginning, it was just always like a nuptial ceremony.
Right.
It's called a lightning way. And so my mom used to take us when we were small. So I guess we memorized it when we were sleeping and waking up, songs. So when I was like 12 years old, I was introduced to dancing. So I already knew the songs. Then as I grew older, I knew the songs. And I sang with the medicine man, like with PhDs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's how you.
And my father-in-law knew that his son would be perfect for me because he knew all the rituals and the sand painting. He knew a lot. So that's how they got us together. But it ended by their jealousy. That's why we didn't continue on.
So the ceremonies didn't.
Ceremonies.
That wasn't all life about.
So
what life
jealousy
is
just
about.
blew us apart.
Yeah. So
Their
jealousy.
jealousy.
Yeah. So there were other things. There's other things about marriage other than ceremonies.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, it's the same way in just about all marriages. Something else breaks you apart. There's something that draws you together. It's usually not that thing that drives you apart. Companies compensating their employees on the basis of how long they've been employed. Extended families living under one roof. And of course, we'll start right here next time. Okay. Thank you for the story, Boris.
Mhm.
I appreciate it.
How long did that last?